we go.
Hooray. Well, good evening and welcome to the March 14th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Dan Isaacson and I am the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission, and I'd like to take the opportunity to open the meeting with the city's land acknowledgement statement. You have to forgive me because I did not bring my green glasses, so forgive me. Since time immemorial, the Kalilua people have been the indigenous stewards of the region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, the Kalilua people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the coastal reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as the Kalipili. Kalipili descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians in Oregon. They continue to make contributions to our communities here and across the land. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federalized, recognized tribal nations and indigenous peoples who live in the state of Oregon and across our nation. Therefore, the Planning Commission recognizes that what we do here today will affect many generations who will come after us. Thanks to everyone for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. Tonight, our first item on the agenda is a work session to deliberate and possibly take action on the recommendation to City Council for the Willamette Greenway Code amendments. The second item on tonight's agenda includes an overview of the discussion of the Planning Division's work plan and major projects coming throughout the next year. Anyone wishing to watch this meeting online can do so by following the instructions listed in the agenda for this meeting. Planning Commission meetings can be also viewed by watching the live stream available on our website or broadcast on Comcast Channel 21. Because this work session includes deliberations and possible action by the Willamette River Greenway Code amendments, we will not be taking public comment for this evening. With that, I'd like to turn over to staff to help us start the discussion off tonight. Gabe Flock and Jeff Gaper will now lead us off in an introduction for the Willamette River Greenway Code amendments item.
Thank you and good evening, commissioners. I'm Gabe Flock, principal planner and project manager for the Greenway Code amendments. I'm joined by Jeff Gepper, senior planner, to help with the overview and deliberations tonight. So tonight we're pleased to be bringing back the updated draft code and findings on the code amendments with the hope of finalizing Planning Commission's deliberations and recommendation to City Council, depending on our progress tonight. We began this process in the fall of 2021 and held the initial public hearing on these amendments on March 8th of 2022 with deliberation meetings in June and August of last year. Based on the input we got, we took a step back and made some substantial changes to the code, which then led to a second public hearing in January of this year, with two more deliberation meetings, which have led us to this point. As a quick refresher, the primary purpose of the Greenway Code amendments is to update Eugene's Greenway permit approval process to provide a set of clear and objective approval criteria for the review of proposed housing development within the Greenway. If the proposed amendments are adopted, an applicant seeking to develop housing as part of the Greenway permit process will be able to choose to proceed either under the new clear and objective standards or using the city's existing discretionary approval criteria. The proposed amendments also now include tree preservation requirements as part of the existing discretionary review process for Greenway permits as well. With the idea being to ensure comparable standards and parity between the two review tracks. So in tonight's agenda packet, we provided the updated draft code, which includes refinements based on public input and Planning Commission direction throughout the process, as well as draft findings needed to demonstrate how the proposal meets the approval criteria for code amendments. And these includes compliance with statewide planning goals and all various applicable policies from the Metro Plan and refinement plans with lands that are included inside the Greenway. So tonight, given the robust discussions and detailed input to date, we would like to help facilitate Commission's recommendation by walking through several key topic areas, which will, I think, undoubtedly seem familiar at this stage. And if you don't mind pulling up the list, Jeff. So for each of these topic areas, Jeff will help with a quick overview as a reminder about the content included in the draft code. And we'd like to open up the commission's discussion for each one as we go. I'd also note that we have the draft code and findings available to pull up in the event that we need to look at any particulars on the screen and get into that level of detail. So the goal with this approach, similar to deliberations on past code amendment projects like the middle housing code amendments, is to see if there's support for moving ahead with the recommendation based on the draft code and findings provided, or if there might be additional changes needed as we move through each of the key topic areas. And we'll look to Chair Isaacson for those straw polls as we move along. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff, and hopefully we can dive in.
Jeff, before you actually get going, there was something that we didn't say in this last statement that I made that we usually make in every one that I'd like to make sure for the audience to know. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Planning Commission and our role in the process. First, we are unpaid volunteers appointed by the Eugene City Council who all live and work in Eugene, like many of you. For this code amendment process, we are not the decision makers, but rather we will review the proposed amendments, all the testimony received to date, and other relevant material before making a final recommendation to the City Council. Go ahead, please.
Excellent, thank you. So I think if I could get Commissioner Bailing, can you see the screen that's being shared? I just want to confirm. I believe you can. Great, I see a head nod. Excellent, thank you. So we're going to walk through these 6 topics that were kind of our main points during deliberations. We're really going to have an opportunity to ask any follow-up questions. And then as Gabe mentioned, we'll do a straw poll to garner general support for those. So those are looking generally at the greenway setback, tree preservation requirements, our native landscape buffering, limits on building facades, as well as walls and fencing, and then our pedestrian access requirements. So I'm going to dive right in. And we are going to start with the greenway setback. Just as a reminder, the greenway setback is generally based 100 feet off of the mapped top of bank. And this is with exception to those areas where refinement plans otherwise dictate exactly how far that the setback is being placed. So in the example you're seeing on the screen right now, there's 100 feet on the left side of the screen, which would be the western side of the river, whereas on the right-hand side, you see it as set at 35 feet based on the Willie Kinsey area plans. That's just a good example of those cases in which the setback differs. There had been discussion about the size of the setback, whether it should be greater or smaller, but based on Planning Commission's direction, we kept it at the 100 feet. And so with that general, and I'll say also that the setback area, which is that area between the setback line and the river, is generally prohibits structures except for those structures associated with water dependent uses and for any of those access connection pathways that are required. And so with that, I will open it up for any questions or comments on the greenway setbacks, the greenway setback line.
I can't see online.
I will let you know if I see Commissioner. Anyways, and Commissioner Beeson.
This is pretty minor. I think it's pretty minor. I noticed it as you were talking, and I noticed it several times in here. When we talk about the setback, we say that it is generally prohibits any structures within that setback. And in one of the finding items, when it particularly refers to the clear and objective track, it uses that language. And I found the first few times as I read through it, the word generally kept kind of jumping out at me. And there was kind of an implication, at least to me, that there was some sort of possibility under clear and objective that you could actually build a house in there, which I don't think is true. I'm kind of wondering if and I forget which finding it is. I think it's number 7. But I'm kind of wondering if we could just do we need that word? Can we take that word out? We say in a number of places that construct any kind of development inside the setback when you're on the clear and objective track is prohibited.
So I can speak to that really quickly. the reason why we use that phrase is because of the fact that we do allow some development in that area. The code explicitly does have that carve out for pathways. And while it might seem not intuitive, a sidewalk is technically a structure. And so when we use that phrase, we are just trying to encapsulate the fact that we are not prohibiting all development. Water dependent, water related uses are allowed there, as well as those pathways. And so we're trying not to, we're trying not to say that it's,
and just to be abundantly clear, we took a very close look at the the code reflects a really narrow reading of what it is that's allowed in terms of the structure. Just right about the use of the word generally in the context of the findings, but as it relates to the clear and objective track approval criteria, our limited interpretation of what's allowed is only for pedestrian access ways that might be required based on those criteria, not a house, not other types of structures.
Okay, well, I appreciate, yeah, and I understand what you're saying. I had thought of paths. I think, you know, as long as it's really clear to people listening, and as we put this through, there aren't any buildings. When we under clear and objective, when we have the 100-foot setback, there wouldn't be any allowance, or we wouldn't allow buildings or anything like that to be constructed in there.
That's correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Bailey.
Yes, I read something reading through this time that I hadn't noticed before, and I wonder, Jeff, if you can explain the distinction of 20,000 square feet. If something is less than 20,000 square feet, do all these requirements not apply?
so that potentially to tree preservation.
Yeah. My sense, Commissioner Bailing, is that you might be referring to the tree preservation standards. We just want to confirm that.
I didn't remember specifically which section it was in, so we can talk about it at that point then.
Absolutely. So our tree preservation requirements for general discretionary tree preservation requirements that exist within code do have a carve out in which the tree preservation, it's been a while since I've looked at them. They do not apply to lots that are, is it below 20,000 square feet? And
so let me, and I apologize, this is from memory, but generally speaking, in the existing code for tree preservation standards, lots that are over 20,000 square feet in size and developed, or actually undeveloped, they are subject to tree removal permits for more than removal of 5 trees per calendar year. Those exceptions are irrelevant in the context of the clear and objective greenway standards, which would apply in the case of an applicant seeking the clear and objective approval of a greenway permit.
Great, thank you.
I think that's the last of our questions. So do we want to put up for a straw poll?
sounds good.
Okay, so is there any objection to moving the greenway setback forward in the process of the final evening's motion, if there is one?
She wants you to ask, do we
Formally though. I mean, you don't need a formal
straw poll? How do we do?
It's just a straw poll that Commissioner Isaacson, it was just the way that you phrased it was asking people to vote in favor of not, it was a little bit confusing. Can I take a
sure
at it? So all those in favor of recommending approval of the greenway setback provisions? Straw poll only.
Yeah.
So Bailing's a yes. I see 4. Great.
Thanks.
All right, and with that, I'll actually move on to tree preservation. So with part of this process, we included tree preservation requirements for the clear and objective track. Specifically, we utilized those robust set of tree preservation requirements that were developed during the clear and objective process to create, to really piggyback off of those and create a river-centric model that utilized those same tree preservation requirements. And so we created tree preservation zones that were based on their proximity to the river. And so tree preservation zone 1, 2, and 3 were basically the first 100 feet back from the greenway setback line, and then 200 feet and then the rest of the greenway. So, and in those areas, you have a higher level of preservation and lower levels of mitigation as you're closer to the river. Essentially, this is intended to ensure that the vegetative fringe, as required by the Goal 15 of the statewide planning goals, is really supported by these tree preservation requirements. And this was, in response to public testimony as well as planning commission direction to really incorporate some tree preservation into this process. But in order to draw parity between these clear and objective requirements and our existing discretionary, greenway approval criteria, we did also incorporate our existing tree preservation standards into the discretionary track. And so that was designed really to ensure that there was a comparable standard within each track to ensure that tree preservation is met in that way. And so I'm happy to answer any other questions regarding the tree preservation that's been discussed previously. Commissioner Fagala.
Can you remind me what the total combined distance is for the 3 zones?
Absolutely. So the greenway setback starts from the top of bank and goes 100 feet. And then your tree preservation zone starts. So zone 1 extends 100 feet landward from the greenway setback. So you're essentially 200 feet from the top of bank. Zone 2 extends another 100 feet. So you're 300 feet from top of bank or 200 feet from the greenway setback. And then zone 3 is any remaining area that's within the William River Greenway.
That's what it was. Okay.
And so, and that's within the figure that we're adopting in the code. It kind of outlines exactly how that operates.
Great. Thank you. It was the zone 3 that I was getting a little confused about.
Yep. Yeah, so that's any areas outside of zone 1 and 2 that are in the greenway. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Thank you.
I can't see behind me, so if
I do not see a hand raised by Commissioner Bailey this time.
okay, so we'll move on to straw poll. All those in favor of adopting the tree preservation requirements signify by raising their hand.
We have.
Thank you.
Native landscape buffering. So this, as a reminder, is the 10-foot strip that extends landward from the greenway setback line. So this is essentially a tool to ensure that there is a buffer from, any proposed development and that greenway setback area. And there was some pretty robust discussion as to whether or not this should be L2 or L3 landscaping. As a reminder, that's really looking at whether it's going to be taller and higher screening, or L2, which is kind of lower and a little bit more, allows more views to and from the river. Landed on L2, and then also we discussed the distance, which is 10 feet for the landscape buffer. There was some discussion about the size of that, and got pretty clear direction from commission for the 10-foot buffering. And then lastly, I'll just say that in this area, it is required that all the plants are of a native species from our adopted Goal 5 native species list. And so happy to answer any further questions about this one as well. And I do not see any.
All those in favor of the native landscape buffering as a
No.
okay. Signify by raising their hand.
Yeah.
All right. And so moving on for the limits on length of building facades. So this is one we discussed pretty early on and got pretty clear direction on the fact that for any building facade, so that's, that elevation or profile of a building that's within 100 feet of the greenway setback, that building facade can't be greater than 75 feet. So if you're looking at the, what you see on the screen here, which I'm not sure if people can see it at home, you can't see my mouse, so I'll talk about it differently anyways. Essentially, the buildings can't be longer than 75 feet. And this is really to ensure that views are facilitated to and from the river so that you just don't have a really long expanse of structure in between the river and other portions of land within the greenway. And so are there any questions on that one? And I do see Commissioner Bailey has her hand raised.
Yes, again, I didn't make a note of exactly where in the document, but someplace. and it might not be in the amendments, I read a requirement that facades be varied so that it wouldn't be all one straight line. Does that not apply to our 75-foot length facades?
So as proposed, the clear and objective standards only include the building facade length and the limit thereto. They don't include additional articulation requirements, but in the event of, say, a multifamily project where those standards would also apply, there are related articulation requirements based on that type of use that would kick in.
So we don't need to include that language in this specific.
So that development standard does exist for certain types of development, as Gabe mentioned, and would apply in those instances where it's relevant. But
right. I'll just say it's generally geared toward those larger building types associated with multifamily. And so it wouldn't necessarily make sense from staff's perspective to include an articulation requirement where we're encompassing all the various types of housing that might be included, say, single family dwellings or single unit dwellings as one example on the low end of the scale.
Commissioner Beeson?
Just to follow up on that, and I think I've read the definition of facade and I'm not recalling what that is, but when you talk about, I guess if it's one building, and let's say it's a duplex, I'm thinking of the facade being the wall, even with an articulation, the wall that's parallel to the river. And that can't exceed 75 feet in length.
That's correct.
Including any indentation.
That's correct.
Okay.
So if it is a multifamily project and there's 2 or 3 buildings, each of 75 feet, how much space has to be between them to continue to provide and facilitate views to and from the river?
That would be situational, and it could depend on a variety of designs, but in certain instances where there might be property lines proposed in between the buildings, there would be setbacks that apply based on the applicable base zoning standard. So say in the example of an R1 subdivision, you'd have interior setbacks of 75 feet, but your example of a multifamily project could may or may not include property lines that would kick in setbacks between the buildings. And so these standards do not specify a minimum distance between buildings as they're currently drafted.
Yeah, I'm good.
Ready for straw poll? All those in favor of limits on lengths of building facades signify by raising their hand.
To go.
All right, so next we're going to talk about limits on walls and fences. And so this is one that there's a couple different components of it. So I'll talk about those. The really clear ones first, which is that within the setback area, so that's the 100 feet from the top of bank to the greenway setback line, as well as that native landscape buffer. So you're essentially talking the first 110 feet from the top of bank. You cannot have any walls or masonry walls or anything that's 100% site obscuring. That's just not permitted within those areas. And then anywhere that's within 300 feet of the setback, you can have no barbed wire, chain link, cyclone fencing, and any fencing that is installed must be at least 50% transparent so that it facilitates views to and from the river. And then further, there are no fences permitted within the setback area either. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on this one.
Not seeing any. All those in favor of limitations on walls and fencing signify by raising your hand, please. Good. Okay, great. So my last key topic for this evening on this
set is looking at the pedestrian access requirements. We discussed these at our February 14th Planning Commission meetings and deliberations. And this really looked at, following the initial proposal around this, we went back and we took a pretty close look at what public access does exist. And we mapped those points that can be seen on the map on the right, which was provided to you in your AIS this evening. And it really identifies any point in which a public path intersects another path connection that reaches the Willamette River and provides and facilitates that transportation to and along the river within the greenway. So with that, we used a buffering tool to identify those tax lots that are not within 300 feet of one of those access points. And there's a pretty robust methodology you can see within there. And basically what we looked at was any of those lots that are not included, that are not included within those things that are within 300 feet or within that buffer. Those are the tax lots in red. They would be subject to public access way requirements. And that really means the facilitation of a public access way from the Willamette River to the next public way that's available. And so the city will require in those instances a public access way to provide that connection and essentially implement Goal 15's requirements for access to and along the river.
One clarification to add, Jeff, I believe you mentioned 300 feet, and just to specify, it's 500 feet as drafted in the code, and that's the distance that determines whether a tax lot is exempt or not from those access way standards.
Thank you. Yeah, you'd think as many times as I've said that, you think I'd get it right. So are there any questions about these provisions around public access ways or how they operate?
I have one. So correct me if I'm wrong. So again, in our last meeting, we talked about private development has a gate. The pathway that lead to the bike path in the park is publicly owned, would not be owned by the private installment, right? But that gate could be installed and prevented access. Are we saying that if it's within this zone that you're talking about, they would have to provide access to the next public access point? And if not, within that range, that they're no longer required to do that?
I can see a couple of different scenarios that in terms of looking at how these code standards would play out, and to sort of as an extension of the example you described, in certain cases, it may be that a property is only subject to the requirement for pedestrian pathways and circulation within the development site and buildings toward the river, but only to the property line adjacent to public lands and nearest the river. And it may just stop there. But in conjunction with the other public access way standards, it could be in certain instances that you have an extension of that pathway beyond the development site that is technically a public access way built to public standards, fully available for public use. Now, in certain instances, if we're able to demonstrate proportionality in the various constitutional requirements to justify an exaction and actually require a public access way through the development site, the code as drafted in these last round of amendments would enable that.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're going through the process, couldn't you just go through the subjective process and bypass all this anyway?
Well, through the discretionary approval criteria, we also have related access standards. They're subjective. They're not as detailed in terms of the specificity in these draft code provisions, but they certainly, under the requirements of Goal 15, enable the city to require public access by any appropriate legal means.
What would be the objection from staff to putting this specific one into the subjective requirements sent to council, so that there is no there's no way around this specific aspect of it?
I think just off the top, I would say that it removes some of that flexibility or discretion based on situations that we might not be able to foresee at this point. And so I couldn't address without thinking through that in more detail what the implications would be. But these are so specific and they're so limited in respect to the clear and objective standards that we might be missing opportunities to require that through the discretionary process.
Any other questions from council? Okay, straw polls, pedestrian access. All those in favor of the pedestrian access requirements as written, signify by raising your hand. I'm willing to vote against.
Lear has joined.
Oh, okay. Did Lear see where did he join?
He joined during that discussion. So.
Okay. Commissioner Lear, did you hear enough to be able to render a vote on this, or do you?
I think he did.
You voted, okay. All right.
And Commissioner Isaacson, just so I'm clear, it looked to me like there were 4 in
favor, 1
support
against.
and 1 against. Is that correct? Okay. Isaacson.
Okay, and with that, that concludes the key topic discussions, but obviously want to provide an opportunity for any questions or other comments that you had for us before moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the opportunity. So since we put these up as is there, I completely understand if I'm in the minority on this. Is there any willingness on part of the other commissioners to make the pedestrian access recommendation to council part of the subjective process, or to recommend them to put it in there? If not, I get it, but that's where I'm at.
Do you
Commissioner
mean
Bailey.
specifically public access part of?
Yes. To putting it into the
I would-
subjective process.
Yeah, I would be in favor of including it also. I think it's important.
I'm not seeing a majority. I don't think we need to get.
Could we get just a summary of what that would mean? So we would be talking about including the ability for people to, through that evaluation process that we talk so much about, they would be able to get a waiver of the requirement, correct?
Not sure I understand.
Yeah, could you repeat that question?
So we'll talk about the clear and objective pedestrian access requirement. So at the last meeting, we added something that was an ability for there to be a waiver of the requirement based on this evaluation process that evaluated the impact.
I see.
Yeah.
You're asking about the constitutional.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So anytime the city makes an exaction, anytime we take property from a developer or we ask a developer to build something off of their property, we need to either pay them for that, or we need to make the constitutional findings that we talked about last time around nexus between the use and the exaction, and then the other rough proportionality between what we're asking for and the new development on the property and the number of people that will be using that public access way. So whether or not someone proceeds under the clear and objective standards or the subjective standards, if the end result is going to be an exaction, we have to do that constitutional process.
So it applies in either the discretionary track or the clear and objective. So how much more, how much less flexible would the discretionary track become if we moved the clear and objective into the discretionary track?
On that point, I think there's one specific piece that is important for staff to point out, and that is that in the clear and objective standards, the access requirements are triggered for any proposed housing that would result in 5 or more dwelling units on one development site. So in effect, that constitutes what we generally think of as multi-unit development. And so at that threshold, if we were to incorporate this whole cloth into the discretionary criteria, we would be essentially eliminating the city's ability to apply those standards to a situation that might involve like a single unit subdivision of any number of lots, right? So there's a whole host of potential situations involving less than 5 units where these would not kick in.
And I think it might be helpful if I read the criterion that does exist within the discretionary track to really illustrate what is intended by that, because it also did get amended by these proposed code amendments to be in alignment with Goal 15. And so it reads, to the greatest degree possible, to the greatest possible degree, necessary and adequate public access will be provided to and along the Willamette River by appropriate legal means. And so essentially, if we were to go the route of looking at all the map where you see a lot of yellow tax lots that are not included, we would forego any right to really require those public access ways on all those lots through the discretionary track if we were to go that route. So it would be a pretty big departure, at least in my opinion, from the intent of Goal 15 for non-needed housing track options. So,
And
like,
in an effort to make the clear and objective track clear and objective, we've identified on that map the parcels that would be subject to the public access requirements and the parcels that would not. And as you saw, most of them would not. For the clear and objective track now, if you added those standards and that map to the discretionary track, then those parcels would also not be subject to access requirements under the discretionary track. Right now, they continue to be subject to access requirements under the discretionary track. So that we would potentially lose the opportunity for public access on those yellow parcels if either the developer chooses to utilize the discretionary track, or in the case of an application that doesn't propose housing, has to use the discretionary track. But now, you know, we couldn't require public access on a yellow parcel for a commercial development, even though they were using the discretionary track. Is that accurate?
that's correct. Yeah.
So it would actually increase the number of lots that don't have to provide public access.
That's correct.
correct, and the range of uses for which we could apply these standards to. So I think that was an important point that Lauren made about other uses beyond housing. So commercial development in particular would be exempt.
Not entirely exempt,
Well,
but if they fell within one of those yellow lots.
Bailing's got her hand up.
Commissioner Basin was first.
Just quickly, I guess, and I don't want to, at the risk of overly simplifying, if I'm hearing or understanding this, we could end up, if we did something like this, with even less access to the river.
Less opportunity to require it.
Right, less opportunity to require it, which I'm translating at some point into less access
Over time.
Yeah.
over time,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which I'm not sure was the goal.
Commissioner Bailing?
My questions actually relate to another topic, so I'll wait till we're done with dealing with this.
You have to help me understand this. So we have a development plot of land that somebody wants to develop. We can go clear and objective. I don't want to go clear and objective because it's going to require this a variety of requirements. I'm going to go the other route by placing these requirements the other route. Somehow that could eliminate access across the board for all the other lots as potential for development.
Not across the board, to be clear.
In the same category of lots up and down there.
Yes, but the folks who are, right, so only folks proposing housing can use the clear and objective track. So those yellow lots in the map don't need to comply with the access requirements from the development site to a public access point toward the river if they are proposing housing. And if they're proposing housing that is more than 5 units. But anyone can choose to go discretionary.
Sure.
And anyone who's not proposing housing has to go discretionary. And so there are a couple problems with just kind of importing the clear and objective track standards directly into the discretionary track. One is the clear and objective track standards are triggered by number of housing units, and there will be developments that go discretionary that are not proposing housing. Two, if you import the map along with the standards, there are a number of parcels that are not going to be required to comply with these public access requirements. But they would be now under the discretionary track because they're not exempt under that.
That all totally makes sense. I guess my question would be, why couldn't you write into the code that this only applies if you're doing it for housing?
Well, that's a good question. And I think maybe we could, but not tonight, that's not a quick fix that I can write tonight.
I'll just add, yeah, I think that the concept, if we were to explore it, would require more staff evaluation and in consultation with legal counsel to figure out how to make it fit in the context of the discretionary criteria. And we'd have to bring that back.
I can count to four, so it's fine. Commissioner Bailey.
Again, I wanted to wait till we were done with this topic and ask my questions about other parts of the draft code amendment.
I think that we are. So I think we're on to you, Commissioner Bailey.
Do you want to do a straw poll, Commissioner Isaacson, or do you feel like you
Well, we're good.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bailey.
Okay, I just had a couple of miscellaneous questions about sections in the draft code. I don't know if you want to pull it up, but 9.88103 deals with development permits and Willamette River Greenway permit. And my ignorance and confusion is that I thought getting a Willamette River Greenway permit, we are talking about development. So what is the other development permit?
Good question. And so just to clarify, in the draft code, section 3 of 9.8810 is primarily existing language in the code, and development permits are defined as including a whole universe of types of building permits, site development permits, and the like, which are still necessary and involve subsequent steps following a Greenway permit approval. So if you think of it this way, the Greenway permit is the first threshold an applicant needs to demonstrate compliance with these criteria and gain the Greenway permit approval. And that does not eliminate their need to obtain various development permits following that to actually begin construction. So that reference to development permit is the types of permits that follow a Greenway permit prior to construction.
All right. So then the Greenway permit is the initial development permit, so to speak, because I would be coming to the city to do development, right?
That's
to build
exactly
something.
Yeah, this provision gives us the ability to say, hey, go get a Willamette Greenway permit, essentially, if you want to build something.
Yeah. Okay. Then the other area that I think may just be a numbering issue is the sections following 9.7055. There's a 0.7305 in the middle there, and then it goes to 7210 and then 7220, and then there's another 7305. And what confused me about it is the first time 7305 shows up, it's talking about the types, the type 2 and the type 3, focusing on the type 3, but then the several sections subsequent to that talk about the planning director's decision. And in the type 3, if I understand correctly, the planning director is not the decision maker.
So
It looks like you're right, Commissioner Mailing. I think we have a misnumbering there. So we'll go back and make sure that we fix that.
we'll reorder it.
So that the section that showed up with the type 2, type 3, does that just belong further down in the document?
Right, they should be in sequential order with the type 2 provisions coming first.
Correct.
Type 3
And
following that.
all the references to the planning director decision relates to the type 2, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, good.
Thank you for catching that.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
it.
You know, I've had a day of a lot of confusion. Thank you.
Which one?
Are there any other questions or comments from other commissioners? Okay. Commissioner Freckler.
If it pleases the chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Of course, please.
I move to recommend that the city council approve the proposed Willamette River Greenway Code amendments as reflected in the draft code and findings included as attachments 1 and 2 to the Planning Commission's March 14th, 2023 agenda item summary for these code amendments.
Second.
Commissioner Beeson seconds the motion.
Motion is perfect. May I just add a clarifying comment that staff understands that the motion includes direction to us to fix the typo that Commissioner Bailing
Yes, please
pointed
do
out.
correct the typos.
Great.
And any other should be urged you mind, yes.
Friendly amendment accepted.
All right. I don't think we have any discussion on there, but if anybody has a discussion, please say so. Otherwise, we'll call for the vote. Mr. Commissioner Beeson?
I do.
Okay.
I have
sure.
a couple of things I want to say.
Sure.
Yeah. We've been meeting on this for about a year. And we've, as you said, we've had a lot of robust discussion. We've gone through a number of iterations on it. And all of that is to say, I think we've been given very clear information over the months, and we've all gotten to learn about the Willamette Greenway. And as I was thinking about it today, I think it's important to I wanted to point out just a couple of things as we send this on. We're basically amending these regulations to allow for the clear and objective track on housing development in the Willamette Greenway. And you guys have been pretty clear from day one that that was kind of the limitation on the scope of this, and we've held to that pretty clearly as we've gone along, which I think has been good. I think when we end up here, we'll be complying with the state goals 15 and goal 5. And as far as I know, we're complying with them now. So there's really no change there. As we get done, we'll continue to comply with those goals, and we'll be bringing the city into compliance with the statute that requires that we offer a clear and objective track to anybody that wants to develop housing. So we'll be complying with the law as we should be. We're also using, under both of these tracks, we'll be using the type 3 review process, which I think is important to emphasize involves a public hearing as part of the review process. It's been pointed out a number of times, but I think it's good to make sure it's clear. We've talked tonight at some length about the clear and objective criteria that we've established. And I think we've got a clear agreement from the Planning Commission on those items. The one in particular that I think we've added the tree preservation standards, as you've mentioned, and I think, unless I'm mistaken, one of the things included there is that for any new, I'm calling it new development, I'm thinking of new housing, there would be a requirement that a tree preservation plan be prepared, which I think is a good thing. We talked about this a few minutes ago, but I think there's or a few meetings ago, but there's a number of things. We're not making any change in the Willamette Greenway boundary. There's no change in the area. There's no change in any of the current zone designations that are out there. There's not going to be any change in, I guess you might call the buildable area in terms of the R-zoned areas. There's no change to any property owner's right to develop housing. That all is still there. And as far as I know, and I think the way we've talked about it, the current environmental protections, if you will all remain in effect. And I think all of this, when I think about it, and as I look particularly at goal 15, where it talks about the community, us and Eugene having a commitment to this, where we take under goal 15, I think we're required to take this balanced approach to protecting the Willamette River as it flows through our community. And I think all of this together that we've over this year, and as we've gone through all of this, we're ending up with something that we're going to be recommending, I assume if we approve it, we're going to be recommending to the council that provides this balanced approach. So I'm definitely in favor of it and ready to vote to support it. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments before we go to vote? Okay. All those in favor of the motion as amended, signify by raising your hand. Motion carries unanimously. Well, thank you all for a good discussion and thorough consideration into the Planning Commission's work on the Greenway Code amendments to date. Let's move on to the work plan agenda, which I believe is Alyssa and Terry. All right.
Yes, would love one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stay here.
I'll take a hand one.
Yeah. If you three, you guys can come sit.
I'll walk over there.
All right.
Get microphones all around. Either way.
Thank you.
Everybody gets situated here.
Alyssa.
I will take it away. Thank you. So tonight we are here to give you an overview of the major programs and projects that the planning team is going to be working on over the next several years. And really our goal here tonight is to ground you in what's going to be coming before you over the next year and a half, and really what we're going to be spending the bulk of our time on. I think, as you know, the work that we do for the city on behalf of the city covers some really important issues. I mean, we address housing, economic development, climate, natural resources, just to name a few. And a lot of these are, in addition to being, high community priorities, they're also, high priorities for council. Some of our work is state directed, some of it is council directed, some of it comes from other places, such as the housing implementation pipeline. I also want to mention that we're not covering our full work plan tonight. So what you have in the packet is not all inclusive of everything that's on planning's plate. There are a number of things missing. We're not quite sure yet. We're still working on how those fit within our timelines. What we're going to talk about tonight tends to have pretty strict deadlines. And so that's why we're covering those topics. We know that there are neighborhood plans on deck. We know we'll be updating our land use fees. We have anticipated getting to a parcel specific comprehensive diagram for a few years now. We also receive council requests for work sessions, and that's just to name a few of the items that we're not going to be talking about tonight. Those have a lot of dependencies, such as finishing projects that we're working on right now, and then also getting resources to staff those up. I also wanted to mention before we dive into this, that we do, that planning and development, the department will be going to council next month just to talk about the department's overall work plan. And so that includes community development, building and permit services, and our admin function as well. And you may see a much longer list at that particular meeting, but probably going to have a lot less detail about it. And I just realized I forget to do introductions first. You all know Alyssa Hanson, Planning Director. I will turn it over and have everyone do some quick introductions, and then we're going to walk you through the attachment A.
Okay, I'm Terry Harding. I'm the principal planner for community planning and design.
I'm Gabe Flock, principal planner and land use planning manager.
I'm Rebecca Gershow. Senior Planner in Community Planning and Design.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Leah Rausch. I'm the newest associate planner on the long range team.
Good evening. I'm Heather O'Donnell. I'm a senior planner in the community planning and design team. Awesome. This is about half of our staff. If you include Linda, that puts us at half of our staff to be working on all of these. I just want to put some context out there. Well, actually, that included Jeff. So who has left? He's over there. All right. So again, half our staff of the planning division is currently in the room right now. I just want to go ahead and jump into attachment A, which is titled Planning's Major Programs and Projects. And again, it's got that tentative there because, sometimes we get new work session requests from council. Sometimes we get things that come out of case law or appeals, and sometimes the legislature asks us to do some more. So always, I feel like our work plan is tentative because we're not sure what may be added. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with ongoing programs and projects. And so these are kind of our bread and butter work, really. I mean, this is ongoing. We are always doing this work. And so, for instance, public information and engagement. Probably the things that you might be most familiar with are our Eugene newsletter, the e-newsletter that comes out at least monthly. We also have social media to just get the word out broadly. We have a weekly land use activity, or I guess it's bi-weekly land use activity email that comes out. So just a number of things that we do to get the word out broadly to the community about our projects, about recruitment, about a number of things. And then the second on this list is regional and state coordination. And that can be anywhere with, working with Springfield and Lane County on some big picture ideas. We do share the Metro Plan and the Public Facilities and Services Plan with them. Could be working with eWeb on their master plan. And it also kind of at the state level, we monitor and provide testimony for legislation. We serve on advisory committees when the state's doing rulemaking. So a number of activities such as that. And Gabe, I think you're up.
All right, thanks, Alyssa. So the next line item for land use application review encompasses a pretty wide range of work that staff on the land use team are doing every day related to implementing the city's vision through our adopted land use code requirements. Our staff, including myself as a manager with 2 senior planners, 2 associate planner positions, and 2 administrative staff, is responsible for processing a wide range of land use application types under the code, everything from simple property line adjustments to partitions, bigger projects like subdivisions, planned unit developments, and conditional use permits. In a lot of cases, these tend to be planning director hearings official decisions that don't come to the planning commission for review. But in some cases they do, such as for land use appeals where planning commission serves as the final local decision maker. In other cases, our staff also leads the process as project manager for legislative changes like our last item involving the Greenway code amendments and prior work on the middle housing code amendments as well. And those tend to be city initiated or state mandated. We also take on a lead role for privately initiated plan amendments, and these often come forward from developers or property owners and would involve a change, for example, to a land use designation, say from residential to commercial, or changes to industrial land use designations we've seen. So in coordination with our community planning and design staff, we also provide support for drafting plan policies and implementing code that go into neighborhood planning efforts like the River Road, Santa Clara neighborhood planning effort. And then finally, the land use team also provides oversight and support for the city's historic preservation program and staffs the historic review board. These efforts include formal review of applications for historic alterations, new designations for historic properties, either as city landmarks or national register listings. And similar to other land use application work, much of that content does not come directly before the commission, but I'd note we do have one historic review board position that's reserved for an appointee from the Planning Commission, and currently Commissioner Edwards serves on the board in that capacity. So with that little summary, really just a teaser in the context of all the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Heather.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the growth monitoring program. So that's our somewhat newish program to collect and report on Eugene data related to people, jobs, and development, specifically focusing on data that is used to analyze urban growth boundary demands and growth management strategies. So goals for the program include being able to compare how we are actually growing to whatever our adopted growth projections were, checking in on our growth management strategies, seeing if they're successful or not, and to be in a better position to respond when trends change. And also to have better data for the next time we do a UGB analysis, which we're going to touch on later tonight as well. So as you may know, if you've been around long enough, it took us several years to get all of the different monitoring systems up and running. This is actually a joint program with planning, our tech services division, and we've pulled in people from across the city to help us with this work because it covers such a vast array of data. As you may know, last year we published the first growth monitoring report. It was a lengthy, comprehensive report, a couple hundred pages, covering data back to 2012, which was when which is the beginning of our adopted urban growth boundary. It also included a significant amount of analysis and recommendations, and this type of comprehensive report, we really only expect to do every 5 years, but we're regularly collecting data. And then annually, we'll be reporting on key development trends. So this year, we're developing our first annual report, and that will be covering data from the last year, 2022. Annual reports will be on the years that are in between the 5-year comprehensive reports. They will, like I said, report on just key data, so not all of the data used in UGB analysis. And it will be much shorter with very little analysis. I think one of our technical advisory committee members talked about it as a report card, and that's kind of how we're thinking about it. And that's particularly true for this annual report since we just did a comprehensive report. So not a ton to say. So for the first half of 2023, staff are working with the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. Commissioner Edwards is on that committee. And that committee is reviewing key data results for 2022 and will be reviewing drafts of the annual report. We also anticipate providing the first annual report to the Planning Commission in late spring. And then in 2024, we'll do it again. We'll do a new annual report, hopefully get in a groove. And so we'll have a new annual report for 2023 data, anticipating the same turnaround probably in late spring. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to what we call our Envision Eugene implementation projects, and I'll take the first couple and then we'll swing back to urban reserves. So I think you're all familiar with the Middle Housing Code amendments, and that was adopted by council last year, and then it was subsequently appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, who upheld the city's decision, but then LUBA's decision was appealed to the Court of Appeals. And although we don't have an exact timeline, it could be roughly mid-July before we have a decision from them. We're still kind of in the briefing process right now, and there will need to be oral arguments as well. So it may be maybe as late as mid-July by the time we have a decision on that one. And then I don't think we need to cover Greenway code amendments. I feel like you guys have that one down, but I will let you know that we're working on getting a council hearing date. May most likely probably will be in June. So they should have action wrapped up before they go on their break. Public facilities and services plan update. I keep teasing you and scheduling a joint public hearing for this one and then canceling it. But this is a joint project, which makes it more complicated. It is a joint project with Springfield and Lane County, and we are updating this our regional public and facility services plan. And really what we're doing is kind of two things. One is updating the project list. So what large infrastructure projects do the cities need to be able to serve the lands within our urban growth boundaries? And so Eugene had actually updated the plan as part of our urban growth boundary. But then some of the utility providers had some additional things they wanted to add. Springfield had some things they wanted to add as well. And so we are doing this joint project with them, also cleaning it up a bit. It still had one giant urban growth boundary. The maps hadn't been updated. And the process on how to amend it wasn't really in alignment with the Metro plan. And so that will probably be coming to you later this spring. We're still working out some scheduling kinks on that one. Again, it's going to be fun because it'll be the three planning commissions. And then just other plan and code amendments as needed. In fact, one will be coming to you next month, which is a Metro Plan amendment related to providing wastewater in Goshen. But other things that you have experienced recently would be the floodplain code amendment. So that's what came through by Public Works, but we provided support. The Skinner Butte height limit, that was another kind of other plan amendments. And then also some come directly from private entities as well. You've seen several of those before as well. And so Rebecca, I think you're up.
Thank you, Alyssa. I think I'm the next one up because, knock on wood, urban reserves should be wrapping up the first half of this year. Since we met with you and the Lane County Planning Commission back in December with your unanimous recommendation, including some changes, we incorporated those changes in the proposed urban reserve package, and we brought them to the Board of Commissioners and the City Council and had work sessions in February. And then we had a public hearing on February 28th that was joint with both bodies. We had about 11 people testifying in person, and we've gotten about 50 pieces of written testimony total. We're in the process of responding to some of that key substantive testimony, and we're going back to separate deliberations for both the board and the council the second week in April. So we're working our way through the public process. They may deliberate and provide action at that meeting, or there may be action later in the month or at a later date. We can't control that part, but we will be taking it to board and council then. It's important that we have urban reserves in place now, because that is our first priority land for us to consider if we need to expand the UGB as we move forward. And Heather's going to talk about those multiple steps before that point. But because we have such a compressed schedule, we're going to have to be sort of doing a lot of overlapping work with that. So, so we're looking forward to those next steps.
Okay, I think I'm up. Okay. I don't know if you said this at the beginning, but we were hoping to hold questions till the end.
Yes.
Did you say that?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I did not.
Okay.
But thank you.
We're holding.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're holding. You're doing a good job. And here's what I forgot to say a little bit more about my team, the community planning and design team, which is also referred to as long range planning. You'll hear that also. So I'm the principal planner and manager of the team. There are 8 of us. And 4 of us are here this evening. We have 6 planners, an urban designer, and a GIS analyst. And those 2 staff members support the work of the entire planning division, ongoing programs, as well as discrete projects with design analysis and mapping expertise. The 4 of us who are here tonight are managing some of the major projects. And so we're here to talk through what we have on our plates and what will be coming to commission over the next couple of years. So my senior planners are Rebecca and Heather, and then Leah is an associate planner that's going to be talking to you about climate friendly areas in just a moment. We also have 2 assistant planners, Zoli and Elena, who I also anticipate will be coming to you at some point because really our whole team manages projects or major pieces of projects. Okay, so I'm going to dive into an update on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. This project is in the adoption phase after 5 years of work, completing the reaching out, visioning, neighborhood priorities, policy development, and action planning phases. Several big shifts, including the pandemic, statewide climate, housing, and equity mandates, staffing changes, and resource constraints caused the team to recently propose some adjustments to how the project will be completed. And we've discussed this throughout some of the Greenway meetings recently. Rather than working towards plan adoption and implementation concurrently with a special area zone, staff proposed delaying the corridor code and zoning amendments until 2026 and folding them into a citywide project that needs to be done as part of the UGB update. And as you also likely know from our discussions about the Greenway and other neighborhood planning conversations, there were quite a few significant concerns about delaying all neighborhood code amendments for 3 to 4 years. So staff have been meeting with an expanded project management team to try to arrive at a compromise, and we have good news to report. We think we're almost there. Through a series of small group meetings, research and coordination with multiple city staff teams, and ideas generated by the neighborhood leaders most familiar with the land use topic area, we are pleased to report that we've found a way to incorporate the most critical things originally included in the corridor code at the time of plan adoption, which is slated for later this year. So the adoption package is anticipated to include the neighborhood plan document, action not to adopt, but to approve the action plan, and a set of neighborhood specific code amendments. And if we stay on track and all goes as planned the rest of this month, staff will be updating the materials to begin outreach alongside the neighborhood leaders in April. We're planning to bring a full update to the commission in May. And that's the update on River Road. I can see a question burning in Ken's mind.
Down.
Right.
Moving along. The other one I'm going to talk about is a little further down the list. It's the comprehensive plan, housing, and compact development chapters. As you might remember, several chapters of the Envision Eugene comprehensive plan were completed with adoption of the urban growth boundary in 2017. However, due to other work plan deadlines, we've not had the resources to complete all of the chapters just yet. Eugene's housing policies remain in the Metro Plan, where they're out of date and not specific to our city's needs. The intent of this work plan item is to complete both the housing and compact development chapters because they contain the foundational policy framework related to and partially required by the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Project and the UGB project, which we'll be talking about shortly. So that's what that one is. And I think we're on to Heather for actually an overview on the Climate Friendly project.
Yeah. So just a refresher, the Oregon Land Conservation and Development Commission adopted what's called the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities, or CFEC, rules in mid-2022 to help meet the state's goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, while also at the same time increasing housing choices and creating more equitable outcomes for all Oregonians. So Eugene, among other jurisdictions across the state, is required to change our housing and transportation planning systems and some development standards to encourage more climate-friendly development
and to reduce emissions from transportation. While the city has already been doing work that is in alignment with the goals of these rules, we have several new projects that have or will be initiated to implement the new rules and support the housing and transportation planning we've already been doing. A longer update on the CFAC implementation projects is scheduled for your April 11th meeting agenda. So for tonight, I'll briefly touch on a few of the implementation projects that have started, given that those project managers are outside of the planning division. And as was mentioned, Leah will talk about the climate friendly area study. So starting with parking reform, that's the project that was initiated first. Eugene is following the state required approach to reduce or remove minimum off-street parking requirements for certain types of development like small housing types, childcare facilities, affordable housing, et cetera. These actions include, as of January this year, the city is already applying reduced or removed parking requirements for certain uses or areas and has eliminated minimum off-street parking requirements within 1.5 mile of frequent transit corridors consistent with state law. Beginning in April, also per state law, the city will be applying new requirements for developments with 5 or more dwellings to require that they provide conduit for electric vehicle charging. And then the big one, finally, by the end of this year, Eugene will also have to select one of 3 options in the rules to reform parking requirements citywide. Related to this part, the first half of this year is focused on developing and implementing a public engagement approach for getting feedback on the citywide parking reform options. It is anticipated that there will be a work session as well as a public hearing with the Planning Commission on those options in June of this year, with adoption by the end of the year. This project is being led by Building and Permit Services. So when we get to questions, we may be able to answer them, but most likely we'll punt those to your April meeting. So just a heads up. And then climate friendly studies.
Yeah, thanks, Heather.
Yeah.
And great to meet you all. As is mentioned, I'm the newest planner on the team, so excited to be here. I'm mostly supporting CFAC implementation and specifically leading up the climate friendly areas study, which Heather teed up nicely. So really, climate friendly areas are just a new tool that the state is giving us to encourage more dense housing development in areas that are well served by transit and active transportation facilities. So really in alignment with Envision Eugene. It's kind of a new name for an old concept you're all familiar with, 20-minute neighborhoods. It'll ultimately just be designated areas where people can meet most of their daily needs without relying on a car. So implementation of the climate friendly areas kind of component of the CFAC rules will come in 3 parts. So this year, and what we've already started is the study of kind of the most promising locations across the city for climate friendly areas. Those based on state requirements for zoning and development standards, transportation infrastructure, and displacement considerations. We've started this work with the support from Lane Council of Governments, as well as Kearns and West, who's a public engagement consultant. We will submit the completed study to DLCD to the state by the end of the year. And then in 2024, we'll actually begin our process to select and designate those climate friendly areas. So this will include a broader public involvement effort and a recommendation from you all and a decision from council to actually kind of designate our preferred climate friendly areas. That designation will require revisions to the code, 2 new comprehensive plan chapters, as Terry mentioned, and revisions to the transportation system plan, as well as the selection of some anti-displacement strategies. Our intent is to adopt these plan and code amendments as a part of an updated UGB adoption package in 2026. Finally, CFA designation won't be static. So this designation will function as a compact development strategy or an efficiency measure. Each time we revisit the UGB, we'll also revisit whether our designated climate friendly areas need to increase. Heather will talk a little bit more about that coordinated process through the UGB. So I'll look forward to coming back to you all next month and getting into a lot more detail on all of that. And I'll hand it back to Heather to wrap up.
Thanks. So the other CFEC implementation project that will have some work this year is scenario planning. The rules require Eugene and other jurisdictions in the metro area to adopt a land use and transportation scenario plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. Jurisdictions in our metro area are allowed to use the regional scenario plan that was developed and selected by local governments in our area back in 2015. This was mostly a transportation focused plan, but it would work in conjunction with the climate friendly area designations that Leah was just talking about. And so that would be kind of the land use partner to the transportation scenario plan. So work that is likely to happen on that this year is that by this June, Eugene and Springfield must submit a work plan for how the scenario plan will be implemented in our region, such as a timeline and identifying transportation performance measures. Eugene and Springfield staff have already started those conversations. Other components of the project will happen in subsequent years. So that's the main work right now. This project is being led by transportation planning staff. And again, we'll have opportunity for questions at your April meeting. We do not anticipate initiating the other CFEC implementation projects during 2023 and 2024, but we do plan on touching base on those, just a brief overview of what those are again at your April meeting. Is it me again? No.
Yeah. UGB.
Oh, hi. UGB update. So it is identified on the plan as the urban growth boundary or UGB update. I call it a refresh. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But as part of the growth monitoring program, the city committed to regularly assess whether Eugene's urban growth boundary continues to have enough land for future projected growth. So not having it be stagnant. But since we committed to that, back when we adopted our last UGB, the state adopted a new schedule for Oregon cities to assess their urban growth boundaries, specifically for housing needs, and to do that at minimum every 8 years. Eugene's first deadline for adoption for at least the housing component is December of 2026, which I think Terry mentioned earlier. While this deadline is specifically for addressing housing projections only, consistent with direction in the growth monitoring program, this next UGB update or refresh will study all of the land needs for the next 20 years. So that will be demands for housing, jobs, and public facilities. The UGB update analysis includes several steps that really are projects in their own right. So these include first creating a new inventory of buildable land, and that is our focus this year. We've already started work on that. We have to develop the studies for how much demand there will be for housing, jobs, and public facilities over the next 20 years. And those studies will begin this year and go through 2024. If our land inventory doesn't have enough capacity to meet the demands in those studies, the projected demands, then we need to identify land use efficiency measures, which Leah mentioned. And those are actions the city can take to grow more compactly than we would have grown if we didn't take these actions. And those measures would be aimed at trying to meet those unmet needs. And so as an example of an efficiency measure, climate-friendly areas that Leah mentioned earlier, planning for those areas to accommodate higher densities of housing and jobs than we would otherwise expect to see, that's an efficiency measure. Efficiency measure work is anticipated for the later part of 2024. And if there's still an unmet need, and again, that could be housing or jobs or public facilities, then we would be looking at UGB expansion for that remaining need, which Rebecca talked about, and then looking at urban reserves to meet that. And that work is anticipated in 2025. But again, with that truncated timeline of really 2023 through 2025 is when we need to do all of those steps for the UGB update, with the plan of starting the adoption process at the beginning of 2026 in order to meet our December 2026 deadline. So lots of overlap will be happening, as Rebecca mentioned.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to mention is that although you see Lauren here and probably assume she's on our team, she is not. So Lauren is part of the city attorney's office, and she doesn't just work with planning. She also works with the rest of our department. So community development, who is working on renter protections right now, also with building permit services, who's working on a number of things. Plus parking. So we are not her only day job. So I wanted to give that some context, given the size that you've got half of our team. We have about, we probably hog Lauren, to be honest. A lot of legal issues here. But we don't have all of Lauren either. I just wanted to put all of that out there. And I know there's some questions that are burning, so happy to answer those. I know this was a fire hose, so thank you. And I'll just turn it back over to you.
Commissioner Pisa. You had a question?
Did you think I have burning questions?
Yes.
I actually have a couple. I have two. The Historic Review Board, I got pretty interested in that last year. Periodically, I go to the website and look at it. I guess I'm interested in finding out, is there a way that I can get more detailed information about it, like some of the things they've done, and particularly going forward when they meet, and how do you get connected to it says in there they meet quarterly, and they do. Anyway, so I may not be accessing everything right in the website, but anyway, I'm interested in finding out more about it.
Happy to follow
and doing it in a way that doesn't take a lot of your time.
Absolutely happy to follow up with more detail.
Okay.
I'm happy to talk on the phone and see more specifically what it is you might be interested in. But right now, I would note that we have 2 openings, and we'll be doing a recruitment for the Historic Review Board coming up here in the next couple of months into June. In terms of any of the content and meeting updates and things like that, we could talk about whether it makes sense to provide the Planning Commission with updates on a more regular basis, whether that's through Commissioner Edwards as the appointee on the board or from staff. We can work to do that and make sure you're up to speed.
Yeah, and it depends on what others are interested in too on the commission. It's not always conducive in our, on comments from commissioners to get a lot of information on things that people are liaison to. I understand that. I did get more interested in it. When I was chair last year, I participated in an interview with the mayor when we brought somebody onto the Historic Review Board, and it was just extremely interesting to me. So I'm interested in that.
Might be able to participate in more than one board or commission for the city.
Okay.
You said you had 2 questions though.
I do. Let me and the other one, I want it to be just brief, but maybe a couple of questions on River Road. As you were talking to us, Terry, I looked at the schedule when this stuff was sent out, and it looks like the River Road plan is going to be done by the end of this year, is the projected schedule. Are you guys coming back to the Planning Commission? Excuse me if I missed that, but you're coming back to the Planning Commission at some point with a more detailed review of River Road plan?
Yes. So the next step for the Planning Commission would be an update. So bringing you up to speed on where we are, what conversations have happened over the last 4 or 5 months. And we should be in the middle of a community outreach process at that point. And that's all pre-formal adoption process. Our current schedule is to then start the formal adoption process with you in the summer. And hope to get your recommendation end of summer, early fall, and then move it to the city council. We don't have a state mandated deadline for this project. We just have other state mandated work that needs to get done. So that is really the nature of the pressure on getting the project done, besides it being a high priority for many years. So this is an aspirational deadline, and
it's good. That makes sense. Okay. We talked last time when you talked to us, maybe it was even at the last meeting, about the corridor study being pulled out and the city making a decision, at least at that point, by 2026, you would kind of combine all the corridors in the city, was my understanding, and do a overview at that level. Was I hearing you a minute ago say that you've gone back based on conversations with neighborhood leaders, and there may be some corridors you're going to, I don't know what the word would be, expedite or move more quickly on?
Let me try to clarify.
Thanks.
There was an original proposal to adopt a special area zone for the entire River Road corridor.
Right.
And we had proposed back in November to shift that focus and instead take a citywide approach and fold it into the work that has been discussed about the urban growth boundary. That didn't land real well with the community that had been working on the River Road plan for the last 5 years. And so we started thinking about different ways we could accomplish the objectives of the River Road Santa Clara plan, in particular development along River Road, which is envisioned to be a compact mixed-use corridor served by transit sooner than 2026. And so the conversations that are still ongoing are talking about other tools to accomplish some of the same objectives, but not through a special area zone, which requires changing the zoning of a number of properties, creating a whole new document, special area zone, writing it, putting it into the code. Gabe knows this is a lot. It's a much heavier lift than the current proposal that we're working on, and Alyssa and others are helping with this. It's really more surgical code amendments in nature that amend the current code that regulates commercial development along the corridor. So there's a precedent for that. For instance, in the South University and other university neighborhoods, there are some special development standards that apply in only certain neighborhoods. And so we're working through that process still to figure out, and the ones that I included on my notes here, code amendments that are surgical in nature, but include really important things that were part of the objectives of the special area zone. So limiting the height of buildings along the corridor to something like 60 feet rather than 120, prohibiting or limiting certain auto-oriented uses in that zone within the neighborhood, and adding some design standards and transition standards between commercial and residential uses. So those are the kinds of things that we're working on, including along with the neighborhood plan adoption.
It might be, some of that may be wrapped into the River Road plan this year, or
that's right.
Stay tuned on that.
Yeah, I mean, the plan right now would be to wrap it in and have it be adopted, whatever those end up ultimately being, having them be adopted at the same time as the neighborhood plan. It still may mean that in the future, when there's future citywide planning, it may be that those code amendments roll into the citywide. They may be some of the basis for the citywide planning. There's a lot to figure out.
There is.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Bergler.
Yeah. So one thing I would like to request an update on after the current legislative session is what comes out of the current legislative session. Sounds like it could be a whole lot of more new things. So I'm expecting, as many people are, that session to continue through the end of June, since it's a budgeting process with, I don't know, 20 million. No, what's the gap? Big gap. So 20 million is actually a small gap for a state budget.
Oh, I think that's the city's gap.
Oh, right. That's the city's gap.
So that I was like, yeah, that does seem small.
That's why I remember that number. I would love to have some understanding of what this legislative session is going to bring us at some point in the future. And then I didn't see the public health overlay on here, and I'm wondering, is that embedded in the climate friendly and equitable communities, or is that a whole nother separate thing?
Well, currently it is a council work session request. So it's not actually been initiated as a project. So hence why it's not on here. There are definitely ongoing conversations. We've talked about where it might be able to fit in here, what that might look like. And although what's been presented is a code, an overlay zone, it could be many number of things. There could be other tools to accomplish, what the intended and desired outcome.
And is that citywide planning also, or
That's a really good question. I mean, I think as it was drafted by some community members, it's really about West Eugene, but there are industrial areas in other parts of the urban growth boundary. So that would be something, I mean, if it becomes a project, I mean, we'll want to study, what problem we're trying to solve. And is that a citywide issue or a specific area issue?
Great. Thank you. Those are the two questions I had.
Before we adjourn, are there any other questions or comments from the commissioners, other staff updates? Again.
No questions, but I did want to thank Gabe and Jeff and everyone else for all of your work on the Greenway Code. It was quite the adventure on that particular project. I know it's not over yet, but I think that the planning staff really exhibited receptiveness and collaboration, which I think we're also seeing on the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan too, and I really appreciate that. And I just want to say, wow, like just a small work plan here, right? So thank you for all of your efforts and attention to these issues. I mean, you're really helping to design the future community that our children and families get to live, play, and work in. So thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Bailey.
Yes, I wanted to ask Heather where you could direct me to get information so I could read more about what you refer to as our growth management strategies. I would like to know what those are.
Sure.
So I'm happy to read any document you've got or website or.
Yep, I can follow up with an email with links.
Okay, great, thanks. And I ditto all of my appreciation for the work of the planners, having come from planning at the University of California and know very well the weight of the multiple projects going on simultaneously. I'm truly in awe of the work that you do and appreciate all of it very much. So thank you.
Especially considering you're still hiring for another.
We actually have 3 vacancies, 2 of which we're hiring right now.
Yes. So thank you all very much. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I did want to just give a couple of quick updates.
Sure.
Can you unadjourn?
I can
know how that works.
Okay.
One, I wanted to share that the council approved the CIP last night. So including the infrastructure for the West 11th and Crow, which was something that came out of the housing implementation pipeline. So we're pretty excited about that. Your next meeting is on April 4th. It's a joint public hearing with Springfield and Lane County, and this is on the Goshen Metro Plan Amendment. It is going to be completely virtual, so you can do that one at home. And it will start with a work session. I think it's a work session at 6, and then the hearing will be at 7 o'clock. And then, as Heather mentioned, the climate friendly and equitable communities update is on the 11th. We're planning for that one to be in person, but we'll get that confirmed. And then on the 25th right now, it would be deliberations on Goshen. And just kind of going forward, I know there was maybe some questions about when are we going to meet hybrid? When are we going to meet virtually? And kind of our rough plan right now, still trying to iron this out, would be the first meeting of the month. We would try to hold it hybrid unless there was a reason not to. And then the second meeting of the month would be virtual. So, but I'll be really clear on any emails and we'll be clear on our, invites to you so that there's no confusion.
Great, thank you. I will not be present at the April 4th meeting.
No, we only have a quorum of folks actually that said that they could make that one. So I'm hopeful that the 4 who said they can make it. And then I just wanted to follow up, Commissioner Fragala, on the legislative session. And I will say the pendulum has swung in terms of housing, and it is a very, very, very pro-housing session. And I think there will be quite a few bills that impact us directly, very directly, and potentially immediately.
There is no additional information now. We are adjourned.
The gavel, Dan.